Good morning and welcome to today's session on Entrepreneurship Development Program at higher education institutions and universities. In this video, I'll be talking about entrepreneurship development programs which are being implemented at higher education institutions as well as at the universities. And it is based purely on my observations and my experience and the scientific literature that I have been reviewing for quite some time. Now, why I chose this topic? Because I see, and you will agree with me, that entrepreneurship development has got a tremendous potential in these institutions like higher educations as well as in universities. To start with, I'm sure you will agree that as of now, the state as well as the central government both are very, very keen in pushing the agenda of entrepreneurship development into the forefront through the programs like skill development and Make in India, right? And they wanted to take it to the national as well as an international level. Their intention is clear. If you look at the budgetary allocations for the 22-23, it has gone up by 26.71%, which shows that the government is taking entrepreneurship development at a very serious note. They have more than 50 plus very encouraging and promising schemes for the budding entrepreneurs. But what surprises me is that most of the entrepreneurial projects, I was going through a report in around July 2020, most of the entrepreneurial projects reported are from the top 20 institutions in our country, like IITs and IIMs. And on top of it, IIT Delhi reported, the highest number of projects, that is 593. So this was one area which got my attention, and I wanted to explore it further as to what could be the reason that why, despite so many universities are there, private university, deemed university, central university, their contribution to the entrepreneurship development is so less. So I started reviewing the literature. In between, I would like to share that IITs are ranked as the fourth largest producer of unicorn startups in the world, right? That's a very prestigious ranking India holds. Now, as I said, I was reviewing the literature. I came across the study conducted by Shankar in 2012. He classifies 6 primary obstacles to student development of entrepreneurship in Indian universities. I will not take much of your time in explaining all the 6. I'll be just for your attention. I want you to look into the point number 1 and 3. The lack of institutionalization and internalization, that is the missing entrepreneurial philosophy. And third point says shortage of accomplished teachers. Now, I was very keen when I said that, to understand what he meant by the word accomplished teachers. So going further into the literature, I found that accomplished means that the teachers were having shortage of entrepreneurial orientation towards the entrepreneurial readiness and their intent. Now, the moment I came across this study, I was keen to move ahead and find out what could be the supporting evidence which I can collect it to see whether the Shankar study holds true or not. From 2015 to 2020, out of 1,043 universities, including central, state, and all the universities, in India, only 177 PhDs have been awarded in the domain of entrepreneurship. Now, this is very, very separate. That means in India, people are not taking the entrepreneurship research very seriously. And Schultz, since 2006, in his studies is conducted, and he said that for entrepreneurship growth, development growth to happen, at the institution level, at the university level, students need to have their interest stimulated in entrepreneurial thinking. And this entrepreneurial thinking, developing of this entrepreneurial thinking responsibility lies with the government as well as with the higher education institutions. So now these two facts, if you look into it, the first one says lack of institutionalization and internalization, which can be found out from this study, that is Schultz. So government is doing its best what it can, but somewhere we are missing it out. Some efforts, some initiatives at the higher education institution, and the shortage of accomplished teachers, which means that enough research is not being conducted in the domain of entrepreneurship development. This is just a chart to elaborate my point that comparison of PhD thesis, I did it with, on entrepreneurship and social sciences. I found that there's a huge difference between the number of theses which have been submitted. You know, the blue bar talks about the social sciences and the orange talks about the entrepreneurship. Interestingly, OECD, that is Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, has mentioned in the report, the ability to embrace entrepreneurship is limited by the way it is defined. Now that's interesting because as I was going through the literature, I found that there is no common consensus on the definition of entrepreneurship. You know, different researchers and scholars have, in different contexts, they have used this term to express their views. So there are many definitions. I'm not going into the details of it. So I'll just have thought of summarizing into two areas. The narrow definition of entrepreneurship considers entrepreneurship education as a business development, you know, self-employment, more or less like on focuses on creation of ventures, right? So that means you are trying to become an entrepreneur. This was a study conducted by Fiol and Gailey in 2008, and they came up with the idea of narrow definition of entrepreneurship. So in a way, as per this definition, you're pushing venture development, venture creation, and trying to become an entrepreneur. That's an actor. The wider definition given by Lekis in 2015 says that entrepreneurship considers entrepreneurship education as a driver for personal development, creativity, self-reliance, action orientation. That is becoming entrepreneurial. Now, this important definition, I find this very interesting because entrepreneurial aspect is a behavioral aspect. This is talking about how and in the beginning I have mentioned that the entrepreneurial thinking has to be developed so that if you wanted to push the agenda of entrepreneurship development at higher education institutions as well as universities. From my work experience and observation, I have found that most of the universities and higher education institutions are following the narrow definition of entrepreneurship, you know, as far as their entrepreneurship development program is concerned, and the reasons are obvious. So they've designed and developed their entire entrepreneurship education program around the business development and venture creation. You look at the various programs which these institutions and universities are conducting. Hackathon, Ideathon, things like that. That's all focused on creating, you know, ventures. The focus, they have a focus which clearly defines that how can the student turn out to be an entrepreneur. They're trying to develop and establish in a way the efforts are putting, you know, to develop the entrepreneurial ecosystem. Now this ecosystem is huge because it is comprising of different stakeholders, and those stakeholders have their personal diverse interests. I'll show you in the next slide. If you look into it, the entrepreneurial ecosystem, developing an entrepreneurial ecosystem is not an easy task, and but it is quite visible from the, you know, strategic point of view, from the, you know, marketing point of view, that you have a separate building, you have a separate blog. So most of the institutions think that if you wanted to push the agenda of entrepreneurship development, you should focus more on venture creation. So what we need to do now, because that's the problem, because if you focus too much on developing the entrepreneurial ecosystem, so as a result, the number of ventures which are coming out is not that significant as compared to the top 20 institutions in our country producing the maximum number of unicorns and the startups. So I have a few propositions, which is again based on the scientific literature that I have been reviewing for quite some time. It requires that we need to shift the focus from content and, you know, dissemination of knowledge to developing thinking and the behavioral. Now this is an important aspect because here I'm talking about, you know, the behavioral change. We should consider entrepreneurship development program as a life skill development program. Don't consider these as a very short-term programs, right? You change the behavior, you change the thinking over a period of time. Instead of focusing on short-term results, that is how to create venture, try to make students think like an entrepreneurial way. Because why I'm saying so, even if you look at the reports across the world who are talking about transversal skills and who are talking about, you know, UN, all these organizations have talking about the development of skills which are required for any student to be successful in life in the future, right? So the entrepreneurial thinking, explain it further in the next few slides. It is essential part of it. So we should focus on how can I think and behave like an entrepreneur. And primarily, most of the institutions offer this entrepreneurship education, in the form of a module or in the form of an elective, which is wrong. I mean, it should be brought into the main course. Like, say, for instance, you should have a full-fledged program in entrepreneurship education. Or, as I mentioned earlier, Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development have mentioned in their report of Future of Education and Skills 2030, they are considering all the cognitive, that is the, thinking, the behavioral skills as an important part of the learning. So they consider critical thinking, creative thinking, learning to learn, risk-taking abilities, proactiveness, and self-regulation will play an important role in times to come. Now, those who are not aware of it, all these 6 skills are integral part of entrepreneurial thinking in a way. So that's when I said we should focus on, training student how to think and act like an entrepreneur. Now, whether the student takes up a job or whether a student starts his or her own business, in both ways, this entrepreneurial thinking helps a lot. Like, say, for instance, I'll put it across in 2 ways. Suppose I'm talking about the critical thinking. Now, this critical thinking not only helps in job, but it also helps in solving daily routine problems of the life. Creative thinking also does the same thing. Learning to learn, this is an ability where I am willing. Then, it's a growth mindset, as shared by the great researcher. Now, risk-taking abilities. Now, again, it is at the organization level. People are given promotions who are willing to take the risk and who are willing to perform and stretch their boundaries. Same goes with your personal life. Proactiveness. How can you think ahead of time? How can you think ahead what lies ahead? And self-regulation. So these are the skills I'm talking about. So these skills are all basically the thinking skills, the attitudinal skills, the behavioral skills. So these skills have to be developed. So if you look now, as I said earlier, I was talking about entrepreneurial thinking. So inferences, if I can draw from the scientific literature, there are many studies I'm not going to talk all about. I'm taking important one. Like Macmillan said that entrepreneurial thinking is a way of thinking about business, focusing on capturing the benefits of uncertainty. Now, pandemic has given us the understanding that what uncertainty is all about. We're not very sure about what's going to happen next. So this uncertainty, one can see uncertainty as an opportunity, or this other can see as a bottleneck. So it's a way of thinking how you can see. Michelle says that knowledge structure that people use to make assessment, judgment, and decision involving opportunity evaluation for value creation. Right? This is again, as I said, about the opportunity. How do you assess opportunity? How do you find an opportunity? How do you generate an opportunity? What is an idea creation? How idea is generated? How is idea validated? Ireland talks about growth-oriented perspective that promote flexibility, creativity, and continuous innovation. Now, these are the things, these are the attitudinal, behavioral changes that a person needs to develop. So, entrepreneurial thinking in a nutshell, based on these 3 definitions, can be said, I'm talking about the behavioral change. Now, if I go back to my, the earlier slide where I have spoken about that the report says that all the entrepreneurial initiatives, major entrepreneurial initiatives are reported from the top 20 institutions. So if I now try to analyze the reason, I found that, I had a chance to interact with the IIT Kanpur professors, IIM's Lucknow ex-director, Dr. Devi Singh, IIT Kanpur director, Dr. Sanjay Thande, and all these people who are involved in this, quite a few. They spoke about the teaching, pedagogy, and assessment of IIT and IIMs are built on the core characteristics of psychological theory of learning and development. They do not advertise it, they do not say it, but they personally have incorporated the characteristics of psychological theories. Now, there are many psychological theories of learning. And these psychological theories of learning and development in their teaching and assessment helps to nurture the personal development of the students. It helps in developing their imaginative abilities. It helps in developing their entrepreneurial competencies. And, it makes them more action-oriented. So, if finally I say that IITs and IIMs, they do not have strong emphasis on entrepreneurship education because that's the common thread which run across all their programs, right? So in a way, they have internalized and institutionalized the entrepreneurial thinking in the teaching, pedagogy, and assessment for all the program and courses. They do not separate entrepreneurial thinking, and neither they name it as an entrepreneurial education. What they do is that they are just following the principles of psychological theories of learning and development, which are a core element of entrepreneurial thinking. So entrepreneurial education should not be treated as a subject of learning, but should be treated as a method of learning. So, and most importantly, people think that entrepreneurial thinking is not teachable. So we must understand and appreciate that yes, entrepreneurial thinking is a teachable framework. And above all, because in the earlier slide I mentioned, Shankar has in his study said, there's a shortage of accomplished teachers. That means training for teachers is essential in educational context. Knowledge, skill, attitude, and behavior of teachers plays a very important role in developing the entrepreneurial thinking of the students. As of now, if you look into it, the entrepreneurial education paradigms which exist as per the researchers have given, therefore, either you educate students for creating new ventures, you educate students for transforming innovative ideas for economic growth, and this is the point where government is pushing very hard. They do talk about innovations. They do talk about, economic growth. They do talk about the contribution in employment. Or third is you educate students to use entrepreneurship for a social change and you create an NGO work for a social cause. And the last is educating students for entrepreneurial mindset. That is, you are training them to think entrepreneurially. So this brings, so if you look into this slide, you'll find that most of the universities are focusing on the first three, right? Either they are talking about new ventures or they're talking about innovative ideas or they're talking about the social change. But more or less, they are focusing on creation of new ventures. When you talk about creation of new ventures, they're talking about business plan, business model canvas, and things like that. On the other hand, I personally think, and the scientific literature says, that if you educate students for developing entrepreneurial mindset, then the above three are automatically covered. So we should stop asking students what they want to be and start asking what problem they want to solve and what do they need to learn in order to solve these problems. This brings to my research topic, that is what I am presently undertaking. I'm doing it. It is the role of teachers' entrepreneurial orientation in developing entrepreneurial mindset of students in higher education institutions and universities. Now, I am trying to study the relationship between entrepreneurial orientation and the entrepreneurial mindset. So I'm trying to understand if there is any relationship between entrepreneurial orientation and the entrepreneurial mindset, the first thing. Second, entrepreneurial orientation is largely used in context of organizational performance. So I have to see to it and I have to work on to it. From entrepreneurial orientation, I have moved on to individual entrepreneurial orientation, and then I'm trying to connect these, these two using the variables, proactiveness, innovativeness, and the risk-taking ability. I wanted to find out that about the teacher's entrepreneurial orientation in their teaching method. Now, if a teacher is having an entrepreneurial orientation, I'm very, very sure he or she can influence in development of entrepreneurial mindset of students. So that's all I wanted to share. It requires a very serious thinking because most of the time we are talking that, UGC has given the guidelines. So people have put up their entrepreneurial development cell with very, very fancy names. But in fact, are they able to produce anything significant in this area? I doubt, because whatever I have worked with few universities in the past and, some higher education institution in and around Kanpur, but I didn't find them, interestingly, that they are into, the process of, they do talk about all these terminologies like what is called green entrepreneurship, what is circular entrepreneurship, you name it. But these terms and the terminologies come at the quite later stage. In the initial stage, it starts with the idea generation. So if I personally feel that if a teacher has an entrepreneurial orientation, if he is innovative in his teaching methods and assessment method, if he is proactive in helping students and decide about their future plans and their careers, and he takes the risk of understanding how how students learn. So then these things definitely influence the student's mindset. And then there is no need for telling student that, you need to innovate, you need to be proactive in your behavior and you need to take the risk. They learn this, it becomes an integral part of their learning, right? So I personally think that entrepreneurial orientation of teachers should make a significant contribution in developing the entrepreneurial mindset of students. I'm very, very thankful to all of you for such patience hearing. And in case if you want me to talk more about this project, that is the Entrepreneurship Development Program at higher education and universities, please feel free to connect with me. And the next slide, in the next presentation, I'll be talking about how do you teach Entrepreneurship Development Program at higher education universities and higher education institutions and universities. Thank you very much. Have a great day.